We're back. I'm Dave Donaldson. Welcome back to Grip Tips. Today we're going to be talking about the Godox UL60 and the SL100, which is a bicolor light. First up, we'll take a look at the UL60, which is a daylight colored light, heading it up on a C-stand arm, which is already a 5/8 baby pin on the back end. And for the first time heading up this unit, I noticed that the receiver was just a tad tight, but feels like maybe over some wear and tear time period will be just fine. Next, we'll drop on a reflector, making this an open face, and we can do that by pressing this button on the very top and twisting the frosted cap until it actually comes off the S-Bones mount. Putting on the reflector mount is the exact opposite of that. We just put the reflector into the S-Bones mount and turn it to the right until it clicks into place. Now the yoke is the next thing that we're going to talk about, which is this serrated biting style, and I'm personally not a fan of this, as I've found that typically I can't make fine-tuned adjustments if I need the light to only tilt a couple of millimeters. The teeth inside of the yoke can sometimes make that impossible when tightening the yoke, as it will just kind of snap into a certain degree. This does an okay job because of the rubber disc dividing those teeth, but I did notice a little bit of a similar problem when tightening the yoke. Next up, we'll drop in our XLR header cable into the back of the unit, and the male side will just plug into the ballast. The ballast also comes with a safety cable so that it can easily be hung from a stand, and moving to the bottom of the ballast, we can plug in our PowerCon connector, and next to that, you will also see that there's the ability to control this light with XLR DMX. Now, while you can power this unit with AC power, they also have a V-mount battery option as well. However, I'm not going to lie, I had a horrible time trying to drop one of my V-mount bricks onto it. The battery would just hang on the V-mount instead of locking into it, and I could easily pull it off without even using the battery release button. I did manage to get the battery to lock onto the mount with excessive force, but after I did lock on, I had to apply pretty much the same upward pressure just to get the battery off. So I'm not going to lie, I'm just going to be honest and say, the V-mount on this ballast is trash. But we'll turn on our light, and as I mentioned before, this is a daylight colored light, which is why everything is blue. But after rebalancing the color temp on my camera, I decided to take some meter readings to see what the TM30-18 score was, and this part I was actually kind of impressed by. The RF and RG scores were actually in a pretty good spot. RF scoring at a 92 and the RG scoring at 102. So if you don't know what that means, color fidelity was a 92 and the saturation was a 102. I'm also going to say that I'm kind of impressed by how much output this light actually has, being that I was about a meter away and I got about 11,000 lux out of it, so that was pretty good. However, my meter did pick up that there's a tad bit of magenta bleeding through, which is probably why the light scored the way that it did. So right out of the box, I'm probably going to have to add 1/8 of plus green to offset that. So that's the UL60. Now let's take a look at the SL100. Now there's a similar amount of attachments minus a ballast and a header cable, and I always find that lights that look like this are just goofy looking, and I can't not do an impression of a machine gun when I see this handle spoiler slash thing. So we have the head, the reflector, and the cable, and I'm gonna say it again, as I've said it on many other episodes, is that I don't understand why manufacturers decide to take the actual IEC cable or PowerCon or whatever type of power cable. I'm not just pointing at Godox here, I'm pointing at a lot of different companies. Please stop wrapping cables for the purpose of packaging inside of these boxes. These power cables come off of a spool. A lot of electricians understand that. So B, what you're telling the electricians who are opening it up for the first time is that you don't take your product serious enough to not damage the cable right out of the package. And C, you're also kind of creating a tripping hazard for anybody who uses the cable, because now the cable can no longer lay flat on the floor. So please, again, I'm not pointing at just Godox here. I'm pointing at all lighting manufacturers. Stop kinking the cables. Please learn what over wrapping your cables are. I've made a whole entire episode on just wrapping stingers. So there's really no excuse that lighting manufacturers don't have this information. So I digress. Heading up the SL100bi, I noticed that it also has just a bit too tight of a fit onto that 5/8 standard pin. But again, some wear and tear might help this. And I also noticed that the head itself is terribly unbalanced. Speaking of the yoke, this is like all plastic, and because of that front heavy issue, it's only going to be a matter of time before this yoke is going to be useless, because it's very front heavy already. And then you start adding modifiers to the front and adding to that problem, and the plastic will inevitably wear down and snap. There's also this part in the yoke for an umbrella to be attached. Other than standard photography units, like flash photography that you'd see at like weddings, I don't really know too many people who use continuous light and those umbrellas. I think that's more of a run and gun maybe really low budget kind of shoot, which obviously this light is targeted toward anyway, but I don't know anybody who's going to use that umbrella attachment. So I think that just didn't need to be there in the first place, because if you're using continuous light, and you have, like, say, a team of grips, you're going to be using 4x frame diffusion, you're going to be using 6x, 8x, 12x, 20x. We're never going to use that tiny little umbrella hole. Putting on the reflector to the SL100, I did find another issue. I was looking all over the light. I noticed that there was a hole, but there was no, like, real button, until I noticed a nice shiny object on the floor. The release button on the top is just basically like a small metal rod, and it's press fitted into a hole. That would have been a huge problem if I couldn't find that, because now how do I take the cap off? And I'm sure I could figure it out with maybe, like, I don't know, something metal and small into that hole, but I don't know. I think that should be rethought. Maybe something that's like drilled and tapped, and you can screw that in there, maybe some Loctite as well, but anyway, moving on. So from there, we'll run power into the head of the unit, given the IEC cable, and then flip the switch on, and boom, we're lit. So the UI is actually pretty basic, straightforward. You can do a couple of things like change this light anywhere between 2800 degrees Kelvin and 6500 degrees Kelvin. You can also play around with the effects. You can group lights together. If I wanted to, say, put the UL60 and an SL100 on group A, and then maybe a group of UL60s on group B, you can do that. I also was able to play with their app, which I found really, really responsive. I'm actually kind of impressed by it. But I think the only thing I would change about their UI, because everything else is pretty much straightforward on the SL100, is the effects display. Because their effects are labeled like 1, 2, 3, and I'm like, I don't know what I'm actually looking at, you know, and I don't want to go grab the manual, crack it open, and be like, oh, well, that's lightning, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's a lot of wasted real estate where that could be displayed right on the head of the unit. And that's not just the SL100, the UL60 is kind of similar in that respect, where things are laid out really well, but maybe need to, you know, take up more of that real estate. So what are my initial thoughts on both of the lights? Okay, well, I have to remember that these are built for the low end, right? This could be streamers, these could be, I'm not gonna say wedding videographers, but could potentially be. I think number one, build quality needs to be looked at again, and maybe some sort of upgraded version. It's to my understanding Godox has other versions that I really just have never even touched or played with it before. I mean, they sent me these units just to kind of check out, give you guys a review and a tutorial. But I think the build quality needs to be thought out just a little bit more. I mean, just simple issues, you know, can't connect a V-mount battery. The little prong for the S-Bones mount, as I just mentioned, just completely fell out. The yoke not being balanced on that unit. I think build quality-wise, I wasn't really a big fan of either. But I also have to kind of humble myself and realize, like, I came from a point in which I only had like halogen bulbs from Home Depot and can lights. So is this an upgrade from that? Absolutely. If you're a baller on a budget, these lights are totally fine in comparison to like things I've used in the past. You can absolutely get away with it. And again, I think they really did some impressive stuff with their app, just being really straightforward and really responsive. But sadly, that is all that I have for you guys today. If you liked today's episode, please let me know in the comment section below. You can also follow me on Twitter, right from there. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you on the next one.